Okay, hello everybody. We are back to Miss Lomana's videos. Yay, how exciting. We are starting Unit 9, and this Unit 9 is on social psychology. I love this unit, lots of fun, lots of great insight. It's basically how we as humans um, behave when we're in a group, and a group could be one person or more. And it also how the groups influence other people's behaviors as well. So quite entertaining, great insight this unit. So we're gonna do a little intro to psychology, to social psychology. So this is going to be on your first set of notes. You'll just write at the top, intro to social psych. Now, I already kind of like set this up of the entire notes, but please do not think that that's the spacing that you're only going to be using. It's just kind of like give you an idea of what's coming up next, but please make sure that you are not getting ahead. Like as I'm going through the video, that you are going through each little piece. Okay, so don't get ahead of yourself and start writing. So we're gonna actually start with the intro to social psychology, and your first tab is going to be your first little what's this called? I already forgot what they're called because I haven't done notes in a little bit. But your subtopic. There you go. See, I found it. So your first subtopic is going to be social psychology, and then we'll start jotting down some notes as we go. And again, it's gonna most likely be more than just 3 bullets. It'll definitely be a little bit more. For this one, you do not need to make a line, but we are going to leave some space and the margin on the side that you can write examples because this is going to need a lot of examples and application. Okay, so we'll start with first social psychology. And social psychology is basically the use of, and this is what we're writing down on our first little bullet, and it's the use of the use of a scientific approach to understand how and why social groups influence an individual's behavior and their attitude. Okay, so it's kind of how, in order for us to understand how and why social groups influence an individual's behavior and attitudes. Okay, so we're going to be looking at that. Then we're also going to be looking how our individual attitudes, so this is the next bullet, how individual attitudes and behaviors affect the social group, right? So it's not just how the group affects us as individuals, but also how individuals can affect the group behavior or social groups. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the whole like purpose of social psychology is in order to try to explain how one person can act differently in different situations, right? And it's not that they're being fake, it's just basically that, believe it or not, groups influence the way that we behave, okay? And also expected behavior in them. All right, so those are the bullets for social psych. Then you're gonna, under social psych, I want you to kind of indent and put, we're gonna focus on, okay? So leave some space in between all of these because we will be adding some examples. So I'm gonna explain it and then give you one example, and in class we'll just add some more, okay? It's also a good idea as I'm doing this that if you think of an example, that you also jot it down so when we're in class you can give me another example that's not the one I'm about to give you. Okay, so in social psych they focus on these 4 different types of social ideas, which the first one is social cognition. And social cognition is basically how we think, right? Because it has to do with cognition, how we think about ourselves and others in a social situation. Okay, so it makes sense. And I love this unit. It's actually an easier unit to remember all of the concepts because if we break it down, how I will tell you to break down the words, then it'll be easy for you guys to remember. So just remember that social is a group. So this is, and cognition has to do with thinking. So this is thinking about like how we think about our group setting. Okay, so for example, when we're at a party and people are dancing, right, it's the thought of like, why are these people dancing, or I should go dancing too. It's the thought around this social setting. Okay, then the next one is going to be social situations, right? And social situations are basically when this is a group of two or more people in there, okay? And then it could also be an individual alone, like it could be just you, but that you're also thinking about a social situation, right? A group of people together. So it's a little bit combined with cognition in the sense of when you're thinking about it, but this is social situation is when you are in a situation with two or more people. Okay. The next one is the social influence, and this is how we are influenced by others in a social situation. Okay, so this is how others influence us in a social situation. And I hope that we're all writing these little things down. An example of this is, how we act with a group of friends, right? Or a group of adults, or, it could be any type of group. Um, and then, of course, just so you guys know, a little side note for social influence is that usually when the more people there are, the kind of the safer we feel of making mistakes, and we're okay with that. Okay, and then the last one is social behavior, and this one is what they focus on is how we behave in social situations, right? So it's more of what is the actual um, a behavior that's observable that we can see when they're in a social situation. Okay, so for example, it could be, how you behave when you're at lunch with your friends, or as opposed when you're at having dinner with your family. Okay, all right, so that's that for social psych. Then you're going to skip a line and we're going to start with another subtopic, which are schemas. Look at that. We've seen that word a bunch of times. I do want you to write there on the side where it says building block for social cognition, because believe it or not, just like schemas, not just shape the way that we think and our perception, but it also can affect the way that we think about social situations. Okay, so we'll go into the first bullet when it comes to schemas. And schemas are basically, it's our cognitive filter. So write this down. Cognitive filter through which we view the world and, most importantly, interpret the information. So this is, schemas are basically how we, they're categories that we create through our experiences that allow us to view the world and interpret the information. Okay. And next bullet under schema, see, not only has one bullet, but you need two. And this one, please write, this schemas come from your own personal experience. Okay. So just think about that as we're relating to other people and, interacting with other people. Everybody has their own schema based on their own experiences. So it's interesting that since I started teaching psychology, I've taken more an interest of, instead of being like, wow, why does that person think that way? Or why did they do this or that? It's more like, let me understand their schema so I could understand them better, right? Because I know that their schemas is what influence a lot more of their thoughts and their perception of the world. Okay, so under schemas, I want you to write this guy's name. His name is Frederick Bartlett. And why you need to know him specifically for this unit is that he actually did studies. He wanted to investigate how cultural schemas, so really interesting. So he does more of the cultural schemas, how that guides us, and we're writing all of this down, to recall certain events or situations, okay? As well as how those quotes, so next little bullet under him is how our cultural schemas influence how we will recall an event. Okay, so for instance, if perfect example is if you're Hispanic and you're going to a, let's say, a Cuban party, right? Like for me, especially when I was young, if I knew I was going to a Cuban party or everybody was Hispanic there, it was definitely gonna have music, people dancing, right? Even though it may not have always been like that, but when I recalled the party, right, it was, oh, they're Hispanic, so you know that that was fun and everybody was dancing, when maybe that might not have been totally 100% true, okay? So make sure to write that little example down. All right, so that's Frederick. He does more of the cultural schemas. And we'll talk a lot more about that because that's quite interesting how that can affect the way we interpret and interact in different groups. So the next one is a self schema, okay? And self schema, and I'm gonna write down this guy's name. His name is the one that started this is Hazel Marcus. Okay, I have to write it down. Hazel Marcus. And basically, what is self schema is um, a construct about yourself and your experiences. Okay, and then typically under self schema, also write this down. We have what's called the central self schema. Okay, and central self schema is like kind of like it's not what we want to be, but more of like the schema of who we are as individuals, and this tends to be the more stable part of who you are, characteristics. Like I've always, my self schema when I was young and still to this day is, being friendly, kind, compassionate with other people. So that's kind of the way that I view myself. It's not always correct, right? Because I don't always like that, act like that, but it's very much the central of who I believe I am. And so these central self schemas, so write that down, central self schema, um, typically will help us, they filter out our perceptions, okay, um, of kind of like our experiences, as well as, trying to see my little notes here, a like we just believe essentially that whatever we believe in of our central self schema is what we tend to always consistently believe. So for example, if you believe that you're a good person and that you mean well, you're gonna think that everybody, right, will think that way, or that that's always the vibe you give. Okay, but it's not always necessarily the case. Um, Now, another example could be like, as for myself, I consider myself a good and caring teacher. However, if other people have like their own schema on teachers, or even the experience with me because they've gotten in trouble because of the homework or they haven't done something, then their perception will change on who I am as an individual. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of idea. All right. Then we also have under self schemas, we also have what's called our possible selves. And this is this aspect of ourselves that we aspire to be, or that we believe we could be. Okay. This also can include some negative outcomes like eh, if I feel like if I spend too much money, then I'm going to be homeless and I'll never be able to have any money, right? So if that's a negative schema of myself. Okay. Not that's not, I'll be honest, it's not super big deal, but just in case, throwing it out there to have that information in there. Now, under schemas, you also have what's called self-serving bias. I know you guys have seen this before. Here it is again. And you're going to start seeing as we're going through the units that they're actually going to overlap a lot of the words that we've learned, and we'll just be going more in depth. This unit, we go a lot more in depth into self-serving bias. because we tend to do this when other people are involved. So self-serving bias is the tendency to perceive ourselves in a positive light. Okay, so we tend to, for the most part, think that we have above average intelligence, that we have higher moral standards. Make sure to write these things down. And that we believe that we're more helpful than we really are. Okay, so those are usually the three things that most people will kind of perceive that they always in a more positive light, even though that may not be necessarily true. Okay, so for instance, when students, and we've talked about this before, when they do good on a test, then they tend to say that they did well on the test because they did the work, right? It could be true, absolutely. But they tend to forget other factors as well. However, if they fail, then they tend to blame somebody else, right? Like it happens a lot when you guys are like, well, Miss Amana, I stayed up till like 3 o'clock in the morning doing your homework and your flashcards that you assigned. Um, so they're blaming me for them staying up at 3 o'clock in the morning when we forget to, look at factors of, well, Ms. Amana has also assigned them a long time ago over time, and it was choices that were made, right? That let's not do it now, let's wait till the last minute. Okay, so it's a little bit of both. Um, okay, and I think that's pretty much it for intro to psych and intro to social psych. What I do want you to do is go to the next page. And I'm hoping it's just one page. And if you don't want to do that and you want to, actually, I prefer just a whole new page would be great. And we start this one, attribution of attitudes. If you're like in the beginning of the second page and there's like all this space, just continue, make like a big space so that you can see that this is the attribution. Okay, don't write attitudes, that even though it has it there, just write attribution because this notes are going to be just on attribution. Okay, and so here we go. Attribution, ready? So we're gonna start here with um, the notes of what exactly is attribution, which is the way we explain the cause or causes of behavior. Okay, so we're basically looking to try to explain, like attribute, right, the person's behavior. Is it because of the situation or is it because of the person? So under attribution, you have what's called internal attribution. Internal is that we assume that the behavior, we're writing this down as well, is driven by internal characteristics. So it's really easy to remember this. Internal is internally in the person, right? We're going to internally attribute the behavior to the person's characteristics. And it's usually either a trait, like a personality trait, or a feeling. Okay, so for internal, it's we attribute their behavior to internal factors. That's a good little shortcut to write that down. Okay, and then external, which is here, is that we attribute behaviors to external factors, such as, and write that down too, situation or other people. Okay, so internal is more of the person has control over the situation and the behavior, and external is something else influence the behavior. And you'll see that this is not always right. And us as humans, how we justify other people's behaviors. Very interesting how that goes. Okay, so skip a line and we start at another subtopic, which is the attribution theory. And attribution theory was basically this guy, Fritz Heiter, however you want to say it. And what attribution theory is basically it's a theory that explains someone's behavior by, um, so explaining someone's behavior by, I'm trying to find like other words that are easier, by either blaming it on the situation or the person's personality. Okay, so it's kind of like this internal and external combined. So attribution theory is when we're looking at trying to explain a person's behavior based on either the situation or the person's own personality or disposition. Okay, so the three factors that are going to contribute of how we explain a person's behavior, um, and it kind of just like these are the factors that help us decide, is it going to be internal reasons, like is it the person's personality, or is it because of external factors? Okay. So the first one is consensus. And under consensus, and again, remember to leave some space. Please do not write one, two, three. Like, let me go through consensus and then leave some, like, write down the notes and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay. So consensus is basically when, if the consensus, which is like the group kind of opinion, if the consensus is high and everybody agrees, then you're more likely to attribute it to external factors. Okay, so I'll say it again. So if the consensus is high, and which means mostly everyone agrees, then you're more likely to attribute it to external factors. Okay, so here's an example. So let's say everybody, let's do hypothetical here. We live in Miami and everybody loves the Miami Dolphins, right? And so if everybody loves the Miami Dolphins and then Ms. Lomana loves the Miami Dolphins, then you're more likely to attribute it to external factors, right? It's because of the situation or other people around them, right? If everybody agrees that they love the Miami Dolphins. Now, if here's another note, if the consensus is low and most people do not agree, then we tend to believe that they attribute it to an internal factor. Okay, so for instance, an example, we'll go into the example of the Dolphins. If, which kind of happens, is that, let's say the consensus is that Miami Dolphins is not a good football team, right? And nobody really likes them, but I like them. You're going to tend to believe it's more of an internal reason of why I like that group, right? Is it because my own traits, my own experience, something internally? Okay. So we'll talk about this more and give some more examples. You could think of, like, if the consensus is that like most of your friend group doesn't like somebody, right? And so, Mary doesn't like that person either. You'll say it's because of external factors. But so we'll go a little bit more into that and some examples. So just keep that in mind when the consensus is high or low. Okay, then the next one is consistency. So if the behavior happens often, okay, we tend to attribute it to internal factors. Okay, so if we see that the behavior is consistent, and we're going to think it's an internal factor. So for example, if I meet somebody and they're mean the first time, right, I might be like, oh, okay, maybe it's the day or whatever. But every time I meet them, they're like really rude. I'm going to start believing that it is them, that is an internal factor, right? They're consistent with the same behavior. Now, if a behavior isn't so common, then you'll attribute it to external factors. Okay. So, like, for instance, if you have a teacher that's always like super happy all the time, right? Hopefully that's me. I tend to try to be as happy and not so stressed. Then you'll think, okay, she's like that, right? Like, that's her personality. And then when you see a behavior that tends to be different, then you'll be like, well, maybe it's just the day or something's happening. You'll blame it on an external factor. Okay? And then the next one is the just world. This one, put a little star next to it because sometimes you'll see it as the just world hypothesis or effect or some other word next to it. But just think of just world like it's related to justice. So put that as a little key thing to remember. It's like justice to the world. And this is and it's a funny one, is that we believe that people will get what they deserve. Okay, so writing that down. And then another little bullet, or they deserve what they get, even if you don't know the backstory. So let's say if something happens to somebody, you're like, oh, they probably just deserve that. Or like, I don't know, they got broken up, they broke up with them, they ended a relationship, and you'd be like, oh, it's because, they deserved it or they did something wrong. Okay, so just world is kind of um and this, write it down, it's that you see the victim as like they were asking for it. And we're actually going to do an activity in the class. It's so interesting, and a nice conversation for all of us of how we will see, like, if somebody does something bad, we're like, oh yeah, they deserved it, even though, maybe they didn't deserve that so much. Okay, so that's the just world. All right. And so under attribution, there's this big theory, definitely need to know, super important for this unit, which is called the fundamental attribution theory. Okay, so fundamental attribution theory is basically, and sometimes you'll see it as the the fundamental attribution error really is, I'm going to add this in there, it's really like the error that we do. Okay, so fundamental attribution error, or FAE, sometimes you'll see it, we'll usually do it like that, is the tendency, so, okay, so under fundamental attribution error, write this down. So this is the tendency to explain other people's behaviors as that it's due to their own personal disposition. Okay, which basically means is that we tend to explain other people's behavior based on their internal attributes. Okay, while under this one is we underestimate the influence of situations. Okay, so we tend to overestimate the influence of personality and then underestimate the influence of situations. Okay, so this happens, I am sure this happens a ton of times to you guys. It happens to me like when I go out to, let's say, a restaurant or I go to the store, and obviously I'm meeting somebody for the first time, so this is a good example to write down. And as I'm talking to them, maybe they're like super rude. They don't even look at you. I'll say like, "Oh, hey, hi, good afternoon. How are you doing today?" And they'll be like, "Fine," or they don't even respond to you. Now, fundamental attribution error would say that for the most part, I would tend to be like, wow, that person is super rude. They have no manners, blah, 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 right? And I'll blame their behavior on their internal attributes, right? To like, I tie it to their personality. Now, instead of the situation, like maybe they're having an attitude because they've been working 8 hours, or 12 hours, and they had to deal with a bunch of people, or people have told them off, and maybe, so that would be the situation, like me explaining their behavior based on the situation. But for the most part, people really don't do that. We tend to say, well, if they're acting like this, it's because it's due to their personality instead of the situation. So this is always good, and I always try to, since knowing about this error that we do, when interacting with people out there, instead of being quick to judge, it's maybe understanding, like, maybe it is a situation, maybe it is something happened to them or they're going through something. Okay, so like when Miss Lomana is with sassy or stressed out, please don't think it's because I don't like you or it's a trait that I have. It's just I'm probably really, really stressed. Um, and I talk to you guys about that stuff all the time. Okay, so that's fundamental attribution error. And we have what's called the dispositional. I'm trying to see, why do I write this? Dispositional factors. Dispositional is like the traits, right? We tend to believe that it's their traits, and situational factors is that it's due to the situation. Okay. Now, um, there is what's also the actor observer bias, and this is also a very important one that you need to know. And this is how we explain our behaviors. Okay, so it's very interesting. And if you guys want to take a little guess, when it comes to our own behavior, we tend to blame it on situation instead of our traits, right? So for actor observer bias is that we tend to explain our behaviors, we attribute our behaviors to internal attributions. I'm sorry, external factors and not internal. Um, and even when we do like when we make mistakes, we're like, oh, it's because of the situation. Look, and I just did that too when I was explaining my behavior, right? It's not like, oh no, because I'm mean. Okay, I hope you don't think I'm mean. But anyway, so but we tend to do this all the time, right? We tend to blame the the external factors and not the internal factors. Okay. Now, there's another word I want you to write under here, under, sorry, and not attitudes. It is going to be called the ultimate attribution error. And this one is basically when this happens when we observe a behavior of a person that is in a minority group. Okay. It could be any minority group, and it doesn't have to be just like ethical, not ethical, like their ethnicity or race. It could actually be like even just, let's say, your magnet, like the magnet strands. If you observe, let's say, a dancer or a somebody in law doing something, you tend to then um you what's this called? You will use that for the entire minority group, sort of like the stereotype. And so you will attribute, right? This is why it's the ultimate attribution error, is that you will believe that, let's say, all the law kids are going to, they're like this because of an internal factor instead of that person that you did observe, right? That one person, they could have acted like that because of a situation. But now you've gone into the ultimate attribution error, in which now you're just um, generalizing to the entire minority group that they are doing that behavior because of internal. So they must all have that internal factor. Okay, so that's a quick little thing. All right. Um, there is also for fundamental attribution, I want you to write down that there was the experiment. Don't think that you need to know the names. I've never seen the names on there. Just know the experiment that they used to create this theory was, and I'll explain it now. And it was basically what they did is they had a bunch of students talk to this woman, right? They were talking to this woman, and you had your control group and your experimental. The control group was that one. It's kind of like their well, I don't know if it's a control group or not, but whatever. They just basically, sometimes the woman would be nice to a specific group, and then other times she would be mean, right, to another group. So the group that saw her that she was nice, they believed that she was always nice. Like that was an internal factor. And then when she was mean, then they believed that it was she was mean as well. Okay? So they blamed whatever behavior it was. It didn't matter if it was good or bad. They blamed it on an internal factor. Okay? So always good to know that. And that's basically it for attribution. And these notes are over. And if anybody complains about the time, vamos a tener problemas, okay? Because I'm putting that, giving you the textbook, okay? Anyway, this is it for that. Love you guys. I'll see you later.